Now that we know how to work with labels and add and customize text in our apps, we're going to see a couple of interactive interface elements. So labels are great for many things, but the user can't actually do anything with them. You can display information on your app, but if the user tries to interact with the label, nothing will happen. So let's see a couple of user interface elements that the user can work with. I'll just get rid of these labels. And then we'll go back to our object library, and you can see just below label there is button. So let's start with buttons, and we drag it in exactly the same way, so we can position it wherever we like. I'll go for sort of top and center. And by default, the iOS buttons look just like normal text, really. They're just colored slightly differently. But we can see the difference if we run this straight away. You then, in a very small way, will be able to interact with that button. So if we tap on it, you can see that it does respond just like any iOS button. And we can customize the look of this button as well, in a very similar way to how we worked with labels. We can change the text color if we want, although I wouldn't recommend it with your early apps because users are used to working with the default color. So I would stick to default iOS color schemes unless you particularly want to have a different style. And again, we can add shadows. We can work with images this time. We'll see how to do that in a couple of videos' time. We can add a background image as well, and a bunch of similar settings to labels. So that's buttons. They're really just interactive labels. They give the user the chance to do something, but the user can't actually input any information with a button. So to do that, we need a text field, and we could just keep scrolling down until we see text field, which is just there in fact, but I'd just like to show you the filter at the bottom, which is very handy. If you want to add a particular type of object, then you can just search for it in there, and that should make life easier for us. So there we go, there's our text field, and again, that's styled in the default iOS way. I usually stretch mine out to the edge of the screen, and if we run that, you can now see that when we tap inside the text field, the keyboard appears, and the user can start to enter some information. All right. So we're getting to something which looks a bit like a real app now, which is quite exciting. I'll just show you a few customizations that are useful when it comes to text fields. As usual, you can customize the font and color and alignment. Placeholder text is particularly useful. So if you want to get someone to enter their email, for example, you might want to put email as the placeholder text. And then if we see this in the app itself, the user will see email slightly faint, and then when they tap in the box, they can just type over it and start to type their email address. So placeholder text is really useful. Just click back there. Again, we can have a background image if we want. We can change the border style, so we've got no border. We can have square borders or the default. And we can put an initial value there if we want as well. So if, for example, we were asking users their country and we knew that most of our users were going to be coming from the UK, we could put the UK as a default option there. So that can be quite useful. What's also very handy is various options, the text that users are going to be entering. So we can fix capitalization if we want. We can also change the keyboard type. So if, for example, we're only interested in numbers, maybe we're asking the user for a telephone number, then we can make the keyboard that appears when the user taps in that text field a number pad. So let's see that in action. There you go. And there are various other keyboard types as well. So if we just want an email address, for example, we can select that, and that will give them the letters and symbols that they need for an email address. So it's really useful to get that right. Makes your app a lot more usable if you select an appropriate keyboard type. And you can adjust whether spell checking is on and various other options as well. All right. So that's more or less all we're going to do with text fields and buttons, except of course to give you a challenge. And the challenge here is going to be to create a very simple login form. So I'll just create a quick label to give you your instructions. So you're going to create a login form, which is going to contain 3 parts. It's going to have an email text field. It's going to have a password text field, which is not something we explicitly looked at, but see if you can figure out how to do a password field, and then a button that says log in. Simple as that. Time to pause the video and produce that form. Go for it. All right, hope that went well. Should have been fairly straightforward. I'm just going to move that label down and then show you how I would have done it. So let's start with the text fields. I'll just search for text there and then drag them in. So as before, I'm going to position my text fields to be all the way across the screen, but not quite to the edge. So this is the email text field. So I'm going to use the placeholder text email so that the user knows what they're supposed to enter in that box. And I'm also going to select the email keyboard type. And I hope you did that as well. It makes it a lot easier for your users to enter their email address. Then I'm going to drag another text field in for the password. There we go. So full width. And again, I'm going to use a placeholder for password. And I hope you found how to make it a password field. Maybe you Googled it. If you couldn't find the option, it's just here, secure text entry. There we go. And let's just see how that looks on the app itself. If you've entered a password on an iOS device, you'll be familiar with how it works. So we just tap in the field and then we type like normal, but as we type, it hides each letter. All right, so now we've got our email, our password. We just need to add our button that says login. So I'll search for button and then drag it in and we'll center it nicely. And then we'll change the text to log in. There we go. Simple as that. So I hope you managed to create something very similar. Let's just see, you can see our email. We've now got our email keyboard there with the @ symbol nice and prominent. And our password field, of course, works nicely. And there's no prediction there either. And then our login button, of course, at the moment doesn't do anything, but it is at least somewhat interactive. Great. So that's how we add interactive user interface elements. Now comes the really exciting bit. We're going to start to see how we can actually get our app to respond to a button press so that something happens when we click that button. And this will be our first introduction to real coding in iOS and writing our first bit of Swift. And we'll do that in the next video.